some people are aware of. I don't believe in willpower for getting things done. I believe in routine. And honestly, the easiest and best way to keep momentum up is whatever your available window for practice is. 15 minutes, 30 minutes, hour and a half, 4 hours, whatever that is that works for you. You have that window of practice, and nothing short of the Kaiser's army showing up makes you miss that. So if your window is 4:30 to 6 a.m. in the morning, because that's the only time you have available before you got to wake up to take the kids off to school and get ready for work, then that's what it is. And when it's 4:30, you get up and you go in and you make the donuts, as we like to say here in the US. Whether you feel good, whether you feel bad, whether you're into it that day, whether you're not. And if you look at people who are very fit or who run successful businesses or are otherwise high level performers, for the most part, that's the way they work. All right, it's 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, time to go to the gym because that's when I go. And that's the best advice I can give anybody is if you rely upon willpower or feeling good to power your practice, you will generally fail. If you rely upon routine, you're going to have better days and you're going to have worse days, but at least you're having that day.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. And I mean, that's it, I think too, that you get used to it too. You keep up you push yourself. That willpower can be a generative, like to get things moving, initial momentum, I think, can't it? But essentially nothing replaces, like if you get used to something like it's the dishes need to be done. You just do the dishes. That's not a big deal. You just do the thing, and you get the benefits. So thank you, sir. Right.
Yeah. Another thing to consider is when you first look at IIH, initiation into Hermetics as a whole, it can be intimidating. Say, even if you're at the first step and you think I need to get from here all the way to there. So I kind of like the divide and conquer approach, but rather than like two fashions of an army, it's dividing your long-term goal and your short-term goal. So if you make your short-term goal being, I am going to fixate on, say, completing step 1. That is what you become consumed by, you put your energy and attention towards, and what you are working on. And then that becomes a marker to like project manage continuing in your development. So then okay, this first marker of my long-term goal is done. Okay, I did step 1, let me go to step 2. And then you put everything into there. Because sometimes and I've mentioned this before, it's easy to kind of get tripped up when people think about how far they need to go or like what it's all going to take, what's involved, and just like show up and do the practice. And as Bob said, just keep showing up to it. One thing I like is just doing the practice for itself and not for the expected outcomes. So it's like, you brush your teeth because you know you need to brush your teeth. You take a shower because otherwise, you would end up stinking after several days, but you just know that's what that compounds into just health and cleanliness overall.
Wonderful response. Yeah, it's a very pleasant experience for myself to sit down and do these practices, and then the resulting after effect. It's very wonderful. And so these are things to hold on to too, guys. Is remember when you sit down and do the practice and you go, wow, this is really great. Something to look forward to. So Tanya, would you like to comment on this, please?
Yeah, I kind of reiterate really what Bob and Victoria said. Absolutely, number one, routine, and also like Victoria said, bringing segmenting things off into focusing on what your goals are at that time, and then to move on. I think as well as you go on, I found it's become, you have sort of fitting it all in that throughout the day can be quite a challenge as well. So my experience is sort of, you know, whenever I'm doing daily mundane chores, I try and fit that in as well, or use it, incorporate it in my daily life. So it's not something which is outside of my daily, it becomes part of my practices, my daily life. So for example, if I'm walking in the park, then, you know, practice the elements, or if I'm washing up, practice mindfulness, or, you know, if I'm swimming, you know, I'm can use magical washing or something like that. Probably not so good in the swimming pool, but, you know, it was that kind of idea, you know, sort of using different mundane tasks to sort of fit it all in. And as well, I think with practice, it becomes so joyful, and it's not something, it's something you want to do and look forward to. And I think if you don't do it, you really miss it. I think, and as time goes on, I think it, like I say, it sort of becomes ingrained in one's practice. So yeah, that's what I have to offer, really.
Pretty wonderful, yeah, and absolutely. I think, you know, when it turns into something that you look forward to, you know, I found that sometimes that takes a bit of effort to get into that regular thing, but it's like if I don't do it, I really notice it. And yeah, I prefer when I have the momentum personally, because it's yeah, it's just very enjoyable, like you said. Okay, now Mr. Philip Harris Smith. Now we were talking just off camera prior to the live, and you actually brought up something related that, and you know, you're welcome to bring it up if you will, but you know, regardless, I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
Well, I was thinking about what folks were saying here, and one of the things that struck me, just very quickly, use a couple examples from outside of the Bardon praxis. In my 20s, I did some Aikido, and one day we had this exercise where we were lifting and carrying the instructor, and he could make himself. There's all four of us holding him, and he could make himself so heavy, and he wasn't a very heavy chap. So he could literally, we couldn't keep him off his feet off the ground. He could just do it at will. And he'd start off by saying heavier or not, heavier or not. So that you could say that was auto-suggestion. But then he would just do a gesture at the other students watching, and we wouldn't know, because it would just be little fingers, and we would be unable to keep him off the ground. And for one of the other guys that was there, basically that was it. From then on, for the rest of his life, he was a martial artist of one kind or another. And you know, obviously another example would be my initial work with the Golden Dawn, which I've mentioned on a previous live stream, where I was working with these kind of Tatva doorways. And the first time I did it, I had a blindfold on, and I was sitting in an asana, and I'd opened this elemental doorway to earth, which it's called Prathivi, I think, if I remember correct. And it was like, even though I was a blindfold on my eyes were open behind the blindfold, and it was like I could have put my arm through this gateway, literally. I could have literally, you know, actually put my arm into another world, as it were. There's like some kind of you know, one of these novels, these sort of, it was almost like that. And that was such a remarkable experience for me, that basically from then on I was a magician. You know, that was it. That was and before then, I was doing, you know, I knew I had to be regular and steady and keep going. And I think that what happens, I think, for people is they have and it could be in any discipline, you know, not necessarily magic, could be martial arts or meditation, all sorts of you get a breakthrough event because you've been assiduous, because you've been working steadily. You get, and it might be just a little thing to other people, but it's a big thing to you. So, for example, the Aikido thing, I thought that was impressive, but it didn't make me feel, oh, I'm going to do martial arts the rest of my life. I actually stopped doing martial arts after a few years. I was more interested in doing magic. But there is the steady work and sticking to it will eventually produce, as far as I can tell, it will produce for people a kind of a breakthrough event. And what it seems to do is it seems to change your priorities permanently, and then you then you don't sort of like, it's like you don't think, oh, I've got to do this today, or it's like, oh no, I didn't do it. It goes the other way around. Do you see what I mean? It's sort of, oh, instead of, oh, I suppose I have to do this because it's rigorous, and you do get days like that. It is joyful, like you say, some days, other days it's not. But if you don't do it, you're like really annoyed with yourself, because that's your thing, that's what you do. It's somehow your priorities, your hierarchy has changed, because you were so solid and hardworking to start off with. You had some kind of breakthrough event in whatever the discipline is, and that breakthrough event might be quite rudimentary when you look back at it, but it shaped you in such a way that was kind of a path that you then went down along, which is different to what I was talking about earlier. Shall I very briefly mention the other thing before we came on stream? Well, the other thing is that once you've started to work, you can actually overdo it. So it's not like, oh no, I've got to do it today, otherwise I'm lacking. Sometimes you have to stop, because, well, I think several of us, we were talking about that, and we've experienced that, where you do so much, you have to basically stop and let yourself cool off for a bit. The longest time for me ever that was about a fortnight, and by the end of it I was fidgeting because I wasn't doing any work, but I knew I had to not do it because I needed to kind of cool off and let myself sort of like slow down a bit, and there's that's at the other end of it, so the regular practice, I would say, is like the starting motor. And once you get this kind of thing going, you actually have to be careful to let the momentum fade sometimes, before, otherwise you can end up overdoing it as well. And that was what we were talking about before. I think that's pretty much what I was thinking of.
Yeah, wonderful. Personally, I found that having a parallel discipline in my life that's maybe unrelated, but not completely unrelated, essentially feeds into that, ability to maintain momentum in other disciplines as well. Like, things are translatable. Get up and go for a run. I do my practice. I push myself to do these things. Okay, James, would you like to comment?
Yeah, sure. Of course, I agree with a lot of the things that have been said. I think it ebbs and flows as well in your life. When I was young, when I had time, I'd burn all the hours on meditation and kung fu. That's all I did. So it depends on the stage of your life, your responsibilities, of course. And, I know I was so consistent, amazingly consistent. And then I got a dog. And everything was thrown out the way, because it's really what she wants in the morning comes first, or how desperate she is to get out. So my training then moves around that. So one of the biggest things I found when I had a period of having to travel from one coast of the island to the other coast of the island for work is pretty much my morning or evening practice would be kind of like my test bed, where I would test my levels to ensure that I was meeting standards and this kind of thing. It would be my level test, and my day would be where I would play and put in the repetitions of that skill. So if I was working projection of consciousness, transference of consciousness, I would play with everything possible in my line of sight. During the day, I'd be on the bus, I'd be going into an apple on the bus, I'd be projecting elsewhere on the bus, I'd be doing energies into my elements into my hand, I'd be charging elements into my fingers, I'd be doing finger gestures, these kind of things. If I was already working on a gesture, I'd be charging that gesture up even more. So my day and my travel was actually really good, because I did so much repetition. And this is kind of almost like what Bob and Mark Rasmus talk about, is I was sort of doing miniature practice. You're doing something for a minute, or you're doing something for 2 minutes, and I'd be doing it again and again and again during my commute, which in total was 2 or 3 hours, 4 hours for the whole day. So that's a lot of practice. And then my home practice, if I was still awake enough, would be a quite rigorous level test, but quite short. Yeah, it would be 20 minutes, something like that. I would just make sure that I'm meeting the thresholds, the lowest thresholds of that level, to ensure I'm not regressing and to ensure I am incrementally going forward. So as long as I'm going forward, that was the most important thing, because obviously when you first start out, you think, I'm on 1, I want to get to 10. But then as you work the system more and more, and you get more experience, you think, well, actually, yeah, I'm here, but did I go into the depth there? So you kind of end up doing circuits and circles and going back and going forward, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And so your obsession with moving forward kind of, or at least for me anyway, reduces, and your obsession with depth and mastership of those skills kind of becomes more important. So once you've gone on a couple of steps, you can go back and look at those earlier steps and go, oh, okay, how am I now? Because those other steps have also built towards that step. So in terms of momentum in practice, it's absolutely important, but I think it's very important to, because for me anyway, it's almost like an obsession. What are you doing at that time? So if I'm working on a particular step, I'll be at the coffee shop and I'll be like thinking about that, and I'll be like, well, can I put my mind in that? What happens if I put my mind in that? And I'll be going over my current work and thinking about it. So I think the day there is for play and for percolation upon those things. Of course, unless you've got a responsible job, of course, and you need to split yourself. But if I will use that for play, I'll use that for repetitions, exposure to that thing, exposure to that skill. And morning and evening are simply test beds to test my level, my thresholds of highest and lowest ability, which will vary as you go on.